And I'm the Director of IT Operations at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. What we do there, we regulate the energy industry, pretty much electrical, gas, hydro, everything that you think of to keep the lights on. And basically that's what I like to use. What do I do at FERC? I'm the Director of IT Operations. I keep the lights on and make sure that we deliver the services to our agency.
All right. So I'm Ron Thompson. I'm from the Department of Health and Human Services, Executive Director for Engineering and Operations. Like Isaac, we keep the trains running in my department. And our focus is really on standards, interoperability. We're pretty much a federated department, federated in funding, but we are making some really good crossroads on doing innovative ways of managing our infrastructure. So looking forward to talking to you today.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Mostowski. I'm the other half of the U.S. Digital Service Procurement Team for the Executive Office of the President. My home agency is the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, where I've been a contracting officer there for over 11 years.
Hi there, I'm Catherine Kravchanik. I work for the General Services Administration in the IT department. I'm a lead project manager in the Enterprise Application Development Group. So I spend a lot of my day overseeing app development projects and the successful deployment of apps and functionality to our internal staff offices on our core cloud platforms.
My name is David Landreth. I work for the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. I'm the portfolio manager for patents. I oversee all the software development projects for the patent office, including and principally Patents End-to-End, which is the effort to replace all the legacy patent IT systems with new modern systems.
Hi, I'm Liz Del Negro with GSA, and I'm the Associate CIO for Acquisition IT Services. So I run all of the acquisition-related services at GSA, ranging from GSA Advantage to IAE and SAM. A very diverse portfolio that ranges from mainframes to continuous delivery. So I'm interested to talk about that experience.
So thank you for those introductions. I want to go ahead and start with the left-hand group of the panel and have you give the group about a little bit of a story about what positioning for change means. What are those enabling activities that are going on in your agency that support the continuous delivery?
Well, so at GSA, it's actually a very exciting time. I know many of you are familiar with 18F and the work that they're doing, and I think when they came to GSA, they really brought that dynamic. In my shop, I do have a large legacy organization. We have billions of dollars of transactions running through our systems, and so I have what you might call, or Gartner calls, a bimodal environment. We are really moving to Agile. I've got DevOps happening right now. We're moving to continuous delivery, but I also have a legacy environment as well. I have a mainframe. It's, we're doing COBOL. What's been interesting for us is I'm trying to move the whole organization to COBOL. Yes, we're still maintaining that environment because it's a very large environment, but you might be surprised to know that we're doing Kanban in our COBOL environment, meaning we are trying to move them to Agile. And one of the interesting things in terms of preparing to move to Agile was you need to try to find any culture change, you need to try to find what's going to be the best fit. And in this case, we have mature systems, we have mature customers. We don't necessarily, even our internal customers don't want to be product owners, right? So the way you might do an Agile Scrum. So for that environment, we're moving towards Kanban and doing what we can to eliminate waste. And at the same time, though, I have brand new work where we're really in IAE, we're really trying to move to continuous delivery. We just stood up the hallways or the acquisition gateway for FAS, and that's all done using Scrum. We're running at AWS. And I would say kind of the enablers, well, first of all, I think it's really dependent. The enablers are dependent on your agency, your organization. A lot of conversation today. You're in acquisition, so what do you do? What did you do to get your acquisition? Well, I didn't have that issue at FAS. We actually have a lot of people one of them in this room, who's going to, helping us to move what we need when we defined that we were looking at Agile. They helped us define what we need. We were able to get there pretty quickly. My challenge is actually IT security and trying to change the culture of our security team, which was really interesting because Mark Schwartz, who presented earlier, who to me, he is way out there on the Agile, in the Agile spectrum. Security wasn't an issue for him. And I think it really just depends on, what you have in your organization, where you can find the right teams that are going to help you get to that end goal and move you to an Agile environment. So it's been quite interesting. We still have a long way to go, but I'm really actually very proud and pleased at how far we've been able to come moving a large legacy platform.
David?
So I came on board at the USPTO about 4 years ago. At that point, they were just starting to do Agile development. There was a lot of executive buy-in in terms of adopting Agile, and then a lot of resistance, a lot of inertia, and a lot of support among the employees. It was pretty divided. I came from industry and had zero experience with the government at all, whether it was as a contractor or an employer. I was an entrepreneur that started 3 companies, sold them, and then this sounded like a unique opportunity at this point in my career. And they were doing some interesting things at the time. Some of them worked out quite well, others in retrospect weren't the best thing to do. One of the things that they started out with the new patent IT systems was they brought in some user interface designers, had them spend several months talking to patent examiners, and had them put together then prototypes that were actually working web applications with canned data sets that they could work through, and then they asked the patent examiners to judge them. There were at the time 8,000 patent examiners. They got more than 2,000 response. So that was tremendously successful as a way of pushing user-centered design into the organization. Then one thing they did that was an interesting idea, but didn't end up working out as well, was they did a similar thing with a Happy Path type application with some very large government contractors for the application development side. The results weren't as satisfying. One of the things that I found that people sat through the demos, and this was in my first weeks there, and they were inclined just to say, well, none of them were very good, but this one was the best one, so I guess we've got to go with it. And I said, let's not go with any of them. Let's just do it ourselves. And it was just a little bit of background. So I came on board my 3rd day. Somebody introduced themselves to me as the person that was hired to do what I was hired to do in 1992. And so they've been trying to do this for a long time. I was kind of the flavor of the month. Nobody really wanted to touch me with a 10-foot pole. And so if I said that, people they thought that was kind of a dumb idea, but I was responsible for it anyway, and they didn't have to have anything to do with it. So they said, sure, go ahead. So the next thing I told them, having come from industry, was, all right, what I want to do is start slow. We'll get 9 guys in. And they said, well, what do you want them to do? And I said, what I tell them to do. And then if I don't like any of them, I'm going to can them. And they said, well, you can't do that. And so it was a learning process for me. And this is, one of these enabling things. How do you write this contract? So, because they showed me a bunch of task orders that they normally have, 3-year contract. It has every single item that is due in the contract. And of course, it can't possibly work because nobody knows what we're going to be doing in 2.5 years. So what we did was we decided we're going to go with 1-year contracts with no option. And if we were going to, they talked to me about incentives and penalties and stuff like that, which are the kind of thing that sound good. But to tell you the truth, I've never seen them work in industry. I've never seen them, I've looked elsewhere, I haven't really seen them work in government. We've got a lot of business to give out, and if they want that, they're going to do well. And then if they want the follow-on business, they'll do well. We can compete it if we want to see what other people have to offer, or we can give them a directed source if we like what they've been doing for continuity of work. So we started laying this kind of foundation. We did a lot of stuff. In terms of user-centered design, don't want to get too much involved in what we already talked about in the previous session, or kind of how to get critical mass in terms of just pushing stuff forward. We talked about that in the first session. But in terms of enabling, making sure that we had buy-in, a lot of times people didn't even know why they were at meetings. They were just at meetings, and that's okay. We could work with that. They didn't know why the performance group, they had no idea why they were being asked to test a product that was 3 weeks old. because they felt like this can't possibly contribute to the outcome of the project. But that's okay, they did the tests. And over time, we got that kind of a buy-in. A lot of that was because of the executive buy-in that we had. A lot of it just because people were willing to go along to get along. But you can set up that kind of framework, you can make it work. I present every quarter to the Patents Public Advisory Committee. It's set up by statute in the Department of Commerce to intellectual property stakeholders to provide input and oversight to the USPTO. And one of the members of that is the president of the Patent Examiners Union. And so we've worked with them very closely. They've been a big part of our enablement in terms of user-centered design, working with pilot audiences so that we can release early and release often. And usually when this gentleman speaks up at one of these meetings, you duck, because he uses it as kind of an opportunity to skeet shoot. And what the last several times, we released the patents in March of this year, and the last several times he's talked about how excited patent examiners are to use this, how this is so different from everything else that's been done, where before it's kind of like they spring it on them and cram it down their throats. How, now since we, just last week he was talking about, since we did the release in March, how this is the smoothest release that he's ever seen. Because what he usually sees is things get released and then they struggle to catch up and dig out of the quicksand for 18 months in order to get them workable. So we've had a lot of success there. We still have a long way to go. We're working still on doing automated security tests. We haven't tackled that yet. We've made important strides in automating functional testing, but we still have more to go. We've made important strides in terms of automated deployment. Most of our next-gen projects are automated deployed, but we still have ways to go. We have stuff that we've developed fully in the cloud. We still don't know kind of the limits of where we can go in terms of a public private hybrid. So there's a lot of things that we're still working on, but we've made a lot of progress.
So I've been at GSA for about 4 years now. When I first got to GSA, I would say that we were in waterfall and trying to get toward agile. We've now kind of come into agile fall, and we still haven't quite gotten to true agile. So I would say in the past probably 6 months, there's been kind of a resurgence in interest in trying to really push us towards agile, true agile with continuous integration. So I'm going through this right now, and my group's a little bit different than Liz's. So we're a little bit more focused. She's got a broader portfolio, and we've looked at some of the things that they've been doing and what we can adopt. But I kind of break it into two groups. There's the technology changes and there's the people changes. Technology is probably 30% of it, and the people is the rest, and the cultural change. So on the technology side, I think we realized our biggest challenge was that we didn't have a lot of the tools that we really needed in place to actually support continuous integration and continuous delivery. So we've spent the past couple of months talking to commercial companies, talking to other agencies, looking internally at what other tools are being used, looking at version control, build management, portfolio management, and we've kind of come up with our short list of things that we need to put in place, automated testing, stuff like that. So we're starting to look at our budget and getting ready to bring in some of those tools. We still have a lot of problems with transparency. So not having those tools in place, the development team can't see what the operations team is doing and vice versa. So the collaboration is frustrating. And then also we're doing a lot of things very manually. We're spending a lot of money on very talented, high-skilled resources that should be doing higher value work, but they're doing manual testing that a computer could do. So we're really focusing on the technology tools that we can bring in to help us automate a lot of the process. On the people side, I think our biggest challenge, what I've seen, is that we had a lot of people that are very interested in moving toward Agile, but had never experienced true Agile or a full successful DevOps model. So even though they were interested, it was like no one really knew how to get us there. So a couple things that we've done recently, we have hired several people, brought them into our group from industry, folks that have had years of experience in successful DevOps environments. And so they've become kind of our evangelists, and we're doing brown bags, we're doing training, they're helping us really set up our roadmap. On the other side, there's also the contracts and the contracting resources. I think we have several dev teams, but some of these contract requirements were written 3 or 4 years ago when we weren't as focused on Agile. And so a lot of the contracting mechanisms that some of the good Agile procurement vehicles aren't in place for us to kind of enforce that or really enable continuous delivery. So we're working to revamp some of our contracts. We've actually had some great conversations with folks at US Digital Service, some very smart folks in the procurement group, looked at some of the examples that Liz's group has put out, and so we're working on kind of how we can revise some of our task orders and the types of measures that we can put in place to enable agile delivery. And one example is we're looking more at like statement of objectives, and I prefer to buy a sprint versus writing down all of our requirements ahead of time. We know that we would like to buy a certain amount of user stories, and we kind of negotiate that together. And if the contractor understands that we've agreed, if they don't meet the objective of completing the sprint and those user stories, then it's very obvious that they haven't performed. So looking at kind of more innovative ways to do some of the agile procurement.
Great, thank you all. Now we're going to go ahead and break the room out. Please, those in the front, please move up to the front board. Those in the back, please gather around there. With the idea of we've got sticky notes, we've got pens, we want to try to fill out the how around the things we've already written into our maturity model. We'll give you about 15 to 20 minutes and I'll bring us all back together. We'll hear from our three speakers and then we'll break out again to look at those things we haven't covered in our model. Thank you. From the three remaining speakers and then we'll break out again.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I guess I'll give you a little bit of my background and what I'm doing now, and as a way to try and characterize how I'm involved in this. So as I mentioned before, my home agency is the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I'd consider them a leader within regards to the federal government for moving towards adopting Agile. From very early on, the director at the time, Director Long, had established an agency, Agile Acquisition, ultimately turned into Agency Agility Strategic Initiative, and from the top down really pushed that we're going to move Agile. I also tell people all the time that I started buying Agile long before I knew what Agile was. But as a contracting officer, first and foremost, my job is to help the customer get what they need. So when I started having customers come to me and say, I have a requirement and it's different than the way the last requirement looked, I really can't explain to you exactly what it's going to look like in a year, but I know exactly what my job is to do. I need to deliver this. So I'd say, okay, well, when I first heard that, I was like, well, it sounds like what you want is to get contractors to come in sort of an FTE situation and you're going to figure out how to use them on a day-to-day basis. Okay. So we did that and that worked, I'll be honest. We had some successful implementations. We also had some not so successful implementations, as typically happens with level of effort. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. Over time, I also had some challenges with my legal office at the time. And rather than continuing to have this argument with them over using that, I decided to come up with another approach. And so what I came up with was a fixed price per iteration. Figured, who wouldn't like that? We know what the price is. The risk is pretty much low up front. And then the complexity kind of came in and people started saying, wait a minute, what are you fixed pricing? How do you don't even know what it is. You can't possibly fix price it. And so amidst all of this, I took an Agile training course. I started looking up on my own, reading books and articles written on Agile, had a much better fundamental understanding of what it is that my customers were trying to do. I could speak the language with them, and that's where I really understood. Now, what they're trying to do is buy a repeatable process for functional code, and if that can't be defined down to a very specific fixed price, then nothing can. So we worked out a process with that. At the same time, OFPP was working through trying to develop, the digital service playbook, and then ultimately they were starting to work on something called the Tech FAR, but it was really early on in that, and they asked if I would contribute to that. So I assisted in the drafting of the Tech FAR and did a bunch of public speaking. And I started noticing as I was going to these different events, the questions were changing from, this makes absolutely no sense in the world, what the hell are you talking about, to, oh yeah, I saw something like this here, how do you do this really unique part of it? And I was like, oh man, this is actually working, this is great. Somewhere amidst all of that, agencies started coming up to me and asking if I could help them, as sort of my spare time at NGA, implement some of these things at their agencies. So I did, because I was so passionate about it being successful, and because I thought I'd get a lot more support at my agency if I could say, look, that agency did it. So it was sort of a double motive there. Amidst all of that, somehow the United States Digital Service heard what I was doing, asked if I would come and join them for a year and do it across the federal government, which is what I'm doing now. And it's an amazing opportunity because in the past it was sort of from the bottom up, trying to push that boulder up the hill. And now I'm at the top, just rolling boulders over impediments. So no, but it is a much easier vantage point. But I only say that to say, so now I do two things. One, work on future things that will resemble the TechFAR but be much more user-friendly, and like TechFAR 2.0, where it's going to have links and accessories to usable templates and samples and user stories, etc. But I also have this opportunity to actually have a full-time job where I go to agencies and help them implement these things. And the funny thing is, what I notice is from agency to agency, everybody's in different places. Some are very infantile in their adoption, some are very experienced, but they all face similar challenges. People who don't want to change culture. It's amazing. I've actually been asked to assist an agency, I'll leave their name out of it. Buy-in from everybody you could think would have to buy in for this to go through smooth sailing. Just about to go out the door, and just the right person raised their hand and said, you can't do this. And we had to start from square one, educating them on why you can and why it makes sense. And so I would just say the biggest thing is bringing in the stakeholders and identifying, examples where these things have been successful. And the great thing is with everybody up here and I'm sure all around the building today, there's a lot more stories today than there were just a year ago on how this can be successful.
Okay, so how many attended the Internet of Everything this morning? So a couple hands. A couple more hands, so about 5 folks. I think we should have rebranded this the Agile of Everything, because the next two guys here are going to talk to you about infrastructure and how we're using Agile in our infrastructure. So I'm going to tell a little story about our transformation, people, process, technology, using our ITIL framework and how we were able to start our journey, not complete it yet, on using IT service management and continuous delivery for the improvement on what we're doing here. So I'm responsible leading a shop for infrastructure and engineering, as I described. And most of these folks have been in these jobs for 20 years, doing the same thing, issuing contracts, and not really looking at a service-based approach for delivery. So we have a huge contract in place right now that we're getting ready to, we're getting our final year of that. It's a sort of a contracted environment that supplies everything for us. So we're actually taking that and dividing it up into 5 discrete pieces, like a lot of agencies have done. And the government will be the systems integrator internally to deliver our services. So we, as far as Agile, that's an Agile way of running an infrastructure, if you can look at it that way. We're doing Dev Cloud for some of our development, so that's pretty. I think you've heard it from a couple of our panel members here. And we're also looking at software assurance, where we bake in security early, maybe software assurance as a service as well. So where we can go into the code development early in the life cycle and see where there are vulnerabilities and potential exploits that we need to close. So continuous improvement is all about looking at what you're doing, really looking at the metrics, looking at your data, and see where there's opportunities to do things differently. In an operations shop, that's hard, and Isaac will probably commiserate with me over a beer later, how you really need to take time and study the problem and go look at it versus jumping onto your next problem. So maybe next year, Chad, when you do this again, we can, I heard him talking earlier how he really enjoyed putting the prep time into this, and thank you and Brian. I really appreciate your help doing this. But maybe it should be Agile of everything, Agile of acquisitions, Agile of everything that we run, not just software. So that's my story, Isaac, and I'm sticking to it, so up to you.
I see. I appreciate it. I don't know what to say after that. I'm done. I'm leaving. No. Just like Ron would say, as far as operations is concerned, in my agency, we are beginning to touch the surface of DevOps and going into that next level. I'd like to look at this, and there's an individual in the crowd who asked me a question one time in my last conference. how you doing, about Agile. And at that time, I wasn't too familiar with it. So, but I'll step away from that a little bit and just look at continuous delivery as a strategy from an operations perspective. One of the things that we discussed on that side, and it's going to be a repeatable thing for the group over there, is one of my agencies, one of the few agencies that have done 2 different cloud migrations. We've gone from on-prem to the cloud and from cloud to cloud. I'm not going to say why. We could talk about it over beer. I actually drink whiskey more than beer. So
All right,
we'll
well,
do that.
that'll work.
But right, or a cigar. But it's very interesting in the 2 very distinct migrations that we did. And it's very important when you're looking at delivery. It's all nice and dandy to have all these frameworks and everything. And those of you who have been in IT for a long time know you had TQM, you have, those of you who are PMPs like myself, you know the PMP framework, you have Agile, you have all this. It all boils down to one thing, really. And some people have talked about it already, some of our keynote speakers have talked about it. It's all about the customer experience. A lot of you have phones here when we talk about enablers. What is enabling my agency? And this is I'm probably giving my last speech here versus what I'm trying to talk about. But it's all about the customer experience. And it's important to know, just like everybody has their phone in their hand, just because, or their tablets and so on, that's what's enabling. Times are changing. The way we do business is changing, or has changed, and it's been changing over a few years. But knowing how to successfully deliver that to your customers is all what it's based out of. Whether you're doing IT, whether you're doing HR, or whether you're doing finances, or whatever you do, it's all about your customer. So from the operations perspective here, when we did our first migration, we had a punch list. Can I hear? I'm not sure myself. We had a punch list of over 300 items that we had to take care of. And yeah, here we go. Let me just do this. We have a punch list of over 300 items, whether it went from fixing DLs or fixing some kind of calendar for someone. But then when we did it the second time, when we really understood our users, when we really knew what they wanted and what they needed, our punch list was down to 5, which is amazing when you look at it. So think about the customer always when you're looking at the service delivery. That's my takeaway.
Thank you all. Thank you all again. Let's go ahead. Thank you. Let's go ahead, breakout again for about 15 minutes. We'll switch up the panel members to the other side of the room. Then we'll bring everybody back and close out with a thought from each of you.